It was a crisp Monday morning in Washington, D.C., and the air inside the federal courtroom was thick with tension. Reporters lined the wooden benches, their notebooks and cameras poised to capture the spectacle that was about to unfold. Pam Bondi, the United States Attorney General, stood at the defendant's table, her sharp legal mind at the ready, but her expression calm, almost amused. At the judge's bench sat the infamous Judge Judge Hensley, a staunch advocate for strict courtroom decorum and an outspoken opponent of anything remotely resembling personal religious expression within the halls of justice. He was known for ruling with an iron fist and had once ordered a police officer to remove an American flag pin from his uniform, citing separation of church and state as his justification. The case at hand was unusual. Pam Bondi had appeared in court as part of a legal briefing regarding a high-profile civil liberties case. She wasn't even the one on trial. But as she stood to present her arguments, Judge Hensley's hawk-like eyes fixated on something around her neck, a delicate, gleaming silver cross resting just above the collar of her professional blazer. "Miss Bondi," the judge's voice boomed, cutting through the murmurs of the courtroom, "I must remind you that religious symbols have no place in this court." Pam raised an eyebrow but remained composed. "Your Honor, I am here to discuss a matter of law, not religion. My cross is a personal item and I wear it every day. It has never interfered with my duties." Judge Hensley leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "You are the Attorney General of the United States, Miss Bondi. Your presence here carries weight and so do your choices. Remove the cross immediately or I will hold you in contempt of court." Gasps rippled through the room. The lead defense attorney, a well-respected civil rights advocate named Benjamin Caldwell, exchanged glances with his legal team. The tension escalated as Pam Bondi tilted her head slightly, a knowing smile playing on her lips. "With all due respect, Your Honor," she said evenly, "are you suggesting that my personal religious expression, something protected under the First Amendment, is subject to your approval?" Judge Hensley's gavel slammed against the bench. "I am not here to debate the Constitution with you, Attorney General. This is my courtroom and I make the rules. Since you refuse to comply, I am imposing a fine of $10,000 for defying court orders." The room erupted in stunned whispers. Even seasoned lawyers looked incredulous. "A fine? For wearing a cross?" But Pam Bondi merely nodded, unshaken. "Very well, Your Honor." She turned, gathering her papers, and prepared to leave the courtroom. But what Judge Hensley didn't realize, what no one realized, was that Pam Bondi was already 10 steps ahead. This wasn't just a moment of defiance. This was a move in a much bigger game. And she had just played her first card. The courtroom buzzed with energy long after Pam Bondi's polished heels clicked their way out of the chamber. Reporters scrambled to draft headlines. "Attorney General fined for faith," and "Church versus State showdown erupts in court," while legal experts on every major news network dissected Judge Hensley's ruling. But for Pam, this was not a setback. It was an opportunity. Back at her office in the Department of Justice, she leaned back in her leather chair, the silver cross still glinting against her navy blue blouse. Her chief legal counsel, Rachel Mendoza, paced in front of her desk, disbelief etched across her face. "I still can't believe he fined you," Rachel said, shaking her head. "That's blatant judicial overreach. The First Amendment isn't a suggestion. It's the foundation of everything we stand for." Pam smiled faintly. "And that's exactly the point." Rachel paused mid-step. "Wait. What are you planning?" Pam leaned forward, her eyes sparkling with the thrill of the legal battle ahead. "Hensley just made a fatal mistake. By fining me, he's opened the door for a federal challenge. And we're gonna walk right through it." Rachel's lips curled into a slow smile as realization dawned. "You're going to fight the fine on constitutional grounds." "Exactly," Pam said, her voice calm but resolute. "I'm going to take this all the way to the Supreme Court if I have to. This isn't just about my right to wear a cross. It's about protecting every American's right to express their faith freely." Within hours, Pam's legal team filed an official motion to challenge the fine, arguing that Judge Hensley's order violated both the Free Exercise Clause and the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. The motion ignited a media firestorm. Cable news anchors debated the case around the clock, some hailing Pam as a defender of religious liberty, others accusing her of using her position to push a personal agenda. Yet, through it all, Pam remained unshaken. This was not her first battle, and it wouldn't be her last. Days later, she returned to Judge Hensley's courtroom. this time flanked by a team of constitutional scholars and civil rights advocates. The atmosphere was electric, every seat filled with spectators eager to witness the next chapter of the unfolding legal drama. Judge Hensley, as unyielding as ever, glared down from the bench. "Miss Bondi, I trust you have reconsidered your position." Pam stood tall, her voice ringing clear. "Your Honor, I have, and I maintain that your order was unconstitutional. The United States Supreme Court has repeatedly upheld the right to personal religious expression. I am here today to defend that right, not just for myself, but for every American." Judge Hensley's expression darkened. "Are you challenging the authority of this court?" Pam's smile was razor-sharp. "No, Your Honor. I am defending the Constitution that empowers this court." The gallery erupted in murmurs of approval, and even Judge Hensley seemed momentarily taken aback by the force of her conviction. But Pam was not done. She turned to her legal team, nodding slightly. Rachel rose from her seat, holding a thick binder aloft. "Your Honor," she said smoothly, "we submit into evidence over 20 Supreme Court precedents affirming the right to personal religious expression, including Tinker versus Des Moines and West Virginia State Board of Education versus Barnett. These rulings make it clear. Miss Bondi's cross is constitutionally protected." Pam's eyes never left Judge Hensley's face. "This is not about defiance," she said softly. "It's about freedom, and I will not back down." The room held its collective breath as Judge Hensley deliberated. For the first time in his long career, he faced a legal adversary as brilliant as she was fearless, and he knew it. But Pam Bondi also knew something else. This battle was far from over. Pam Bondi's challenge to Judge Hensley's ruling exploded beyond the courtroom, igniting a nationwide debate. Across America, citizens took sides, some praising her courage, others decrying what they saw as a breach of the separation between church and state. Social media boiled over with hashtags like #StandWithPam and #ChurchAndStateNow trending for days. Major news outlets couldn't get enough. Every night, primetime panels dissected the case. On one network, a constitutional law professor lauded Pam's approach. Attorney General Bondi isn't just making a statement. She's setting a legal precedent that could redefine religious expression in public spaces. Meanwhile, another network was less charitable. Is Pam Bondi using the Department of Justice to push her personal beliefs? One commentator demanded. Shouldn't the Attorney General focus on upholding laws, not challenging them? Pam took it all in stride. As the legal process advanced, she worked long hours with her team, fine-tuning her arguments for the inevitable appellate hearing. But one night, as the city lights glittered outside her office window, Rachel Mendoza brought her a file that changed everything. "You need to see this," Rachel said, placing a thick stack of papers on Pam's desk. Pam flipped through the documents, her eyes narrowing. "These are Judge Hensley's prior rulings." "Exactly," Rachel nodded. "Look closely at Case 17-04 Morgan versus State Board of Ethics. He ruled in favor of a government official wearing a symbol, an environmental badge, on First Amendment grounds. But now he's singling you out for a cross? That's blatant inconsistency." Pam's pulse quickened. "If we can prove judicial bias, we undermine his entire argument." Rachel smiled. "And we have the receipts." The next morning, Pam and her team filed a supplemental motion citing Judge Hensley's contradictory rulings. Within hours, the media latched onto the revelation. "Bias on the bench?" blared across newspaper headlines, and legal analysts speculated whether Hensley's credibility was now irreparably damaged. Things escalated when a bipartisan group of U.S. senators weighed in. At a press conference on Capitol Hill, Senator Marcus Reynolds, an independent voice known for his pragmatism, didn't mince words. "I may not agree with Pam Bondi on every issue," Reynolds said, "but on this, she's right. No judge, no matter how powerful, can rewrite the Constitution to fit personal preferences." The pressure on Judge Hensley grew. Rumors swirled that he was facing internal review by the Judicial Ethics Committee. Still, the man himself remained publicly defiant, dismissing the backlash as media hysteria. But behind closed doors he was rattled, and Pam knew it. When the day of the appellate hearing arrived, the courtroom was packed to capacity. The panel of 3 appellate judges, 2 appointed by different administrations, brought a balanced, fair-minded approach. Pam stood confidently at the podium, ready for the fight. "Your Honors," she began, "this case is not about me. It's about whether any American, regardless of faith, has the right to personal expression. Judge Hensley's ruling undermines that right and contradicts established legal precedent." Judge Victoria Lang, known for her sharp intellect, adjusted her glasses. "Miss Bondi, your motion raises an allegation of judicial bias. Can you expand on that?" Pam nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. In previous cases, Judge Hensley has ruled in favor of other personal symbols, including a political badge. By fining me for a cross, he applied an inconsistent legal standard, a violation of equal protection under the law." The courtroom grew still as the weight of Pam's argument settled over the panel. Even her critics couldn't deny the strength of her case. By the time she returned to her seat, Rachel whispered, "You just flipped the script." Pam's smile was faint but fierce. "And we're just getting started." The appellate judges deliberated for weeks, but Pam Bondi remained patient. She knew the law was on her side. She had built her case brick by brick, and now all she had to do was wait. Public opinion had begun to swing in her favor. Polls showed that over 72% of Americans believed she had the right to wear her cross, regardless of her position. Meanwhile, Judge Hensley's reputation took a significant hit. Investigative journalists uncovered additional cases where his rulings seemed to bend against people of faith. Legal ethics committees began a quiet but serious inquiry into his courtroom behavior. For the first time in his career, Hensley wasn't untouchable. One chilly morning, as frost coated the steps of the U.S. Court of Appeals, the ruling finally arrived. Pam stood in her office, Rachel by her side, as she scanned the decision. Her eyes moved quickly, absorbing the court's language with the precision of a legal marksman. And then she smiled. "They reversed it," she said softly, triumph flashing across her face. Rachel nearly dropped her coffee. "What?" Pam read aloud, "The court finds Judge Hensley's ruling to be an unconstitutional restriction on the First Amendment rights of the Attorney General. We vacate the fine and order the court to cease further punitive actions." Rachel clapped her hands together. "We won." Pam nodded but remained focused. "It's a victory, but the real battle is ahead. This isn't just about me. We need to make sure no American ever faces this kind of punishment for expressing their faith." True to her word, Pam wasn't done. Within days, she announced her next move, a push for new federal legislation called the Faith and Freedom Protection Act, designed to ensure that personal expressions of faith would be protected in public and professional spaces. The proposal sparked another media frenzy. Supporters flooded Congress with letters and calls demanding its passage. Civil liberties organizations, many of which had been critical of Pam in the past, found themselves agreeing with her on this point. As momentum built, Pam prepared for her testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee. The hearing room overflowed with spectators as cameras from every major news network broadcasted the event live. When Pam stepped forward to speak, she radiated calm authority. The cross around her neck gleamed under the bright lights. "Honorable Senators," she began, "this is not about my personal beliefs. This is about the First Amendment, the cornerstone of our democracy. When one American's freedom is threatened, all our freedoms are at risk. I wore my cross not to make a statement, but to remind myself of who I am. No judge, no government should have the power to take that away from anyone." Senator Reynolds leaned forward. "Attorney General Bondi, your case has stirred strong opinions on both sides. What do you say to those who argue that public officials should remain neutral?" Pam's answer was ready. "Neutrality does not mean erasing personal identity. If we silence religious expression, where does it end? Today it's a cross. Tomorrow, it could be someone's right to express their cultural heritage or personal values. The Constitution protects us all, or it protects no one." Her words hung in the air, resonating far beyond the chamber. By the time she finished, the crowd erupted in applause, a rare bipartisan moment in a divided Washington. 3 weeks later, the Faith and Freedom Protection Act passed the Senate with overwhelming support, sending a clear message. Personal expression would not be silenced in the United States. And at the heart of it all stood Pam Bondi, a woman who had faced down the system and won, not just for herself, but for millions of Americans who believed that freedom of faith was a right worth fighting for. But even as the ink dried on the new law, Pam knew that the struggle for liberty never truly ends, and she was ready for whatever came next. Months after the passage of the Faith and Freedom Protection Act, Pam Bondi's name became synonymous with defending constitutional liberties. Her victory was not just a legal milestone, it sparked a national conversation about personal freedom, government overreach, and the delicate balance between public service and private beliefs. But the fight wasn't over. Pam knew that the real test of any law was how it held up in the face of future challenges. She continued to travel across the country, speaking at universities, legal symposiums, and faith-based organizations. Her message was simple yet powerful. Your rights are only as strong as your willingness to defend them. In Washington, however, Judge Hensley wasn't ready to fade quietly into the background. Despite his bruised reputation, he launched a public defense of his actions, claiming that religious symbols in government offices violated the Establishment Clause. His allies argued that Pam's victory opened the door for all forms of personal expression, even though some might find controversial. Pam, ever the legal strategist, anticipated this line of attack. When a new case emerged, a government employee in Oregon who was suspended for wearing a religious headscarf, she personally filed an amicus brief with the U.S. Supreme Court in support of the employee's rights. During the historic Marshall v. State of Oregon hearing, Pam's arguments echoed throughout the highest court in the land. She drew a direct line between her case and this new battle, insisting that the law must protect every American, regardless of their religion, culture, or personal beliefs. The First Amendment, she declared during oral arguments, was never intended to create a public sphere stripped of identity. It exists to protect individual freedoms against the overreach of government power. Her words carried weight. In a 7-2 ruling, the Supreme Court reaffirmed the principles she had fought for, expanding protections for personal religious expression in public employment. The decision cited Bondi v. Hensley as a foundational case, ensuring her legacy in the annals of constitutional law. Back home, Pam allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. The journey had not been easy. She had faced public scrutiny, political backlash, and legal warfare. But through it all, she had remained steadfast. One evening, as the sun dipped below the Washington skyline, Rachel Mendoza joined her on the balcony of the Department of Justice building. "You did it," Rachel said softly. "2 landmark cases. An entire law named after your fight. This will be remembered for generations." Pam smiled, the familiar silver cross still hanging against her blouse. "It was never about me," she said. "It was about every American who shouldn't have to choose between their faith and their freedom." Rachel shook her head with admiration. "You know what they're calling you in legal circles now?" Pam raised an eyebrow. "Dare I ask?" Rachel laughed. "The legal genius of liberty. Even your critics can't deny it. You've reshaped the conversation around personal rights." Pam chuckled softly but turned serious. "Titles don't matter. What matters is that the next time someone faces the same challenge, they'll know the law is on their side." And with that, Pam Bondi returned to her work, defending the Constitution with the same unyielding brilliance and courage that had made her a symbol of modern American liberty. Because for Pam Bondi, the fight for freedom was never just a job.